So there was a whole bunch of bullshit when Assange was arrested. That should have set off alarms all across the world as uh, a a intolerable act of authoritarianism by the UK on behalf of the US. But what happened instead was uh, the US government, as well as the Ecuadorian president, Lenin Moreno, with the sycophantic support of U.S. mainstream media pundits and comedians, including Saturday Night Fucking Live. They spread all this stupid propaganda about how Assange was this intolerably rude guest at the embassy with bad hygiene, who failed to clean up after his cat, and who, oh my God, he was bored because he spent 7 years in the confines of 2 rooms with very little sunlight, and he tried skateboarding inside just to pass the time. They did all this sophomoric deep state propaganda to hang Assange in the court of public opinion. And what actually happened is really interesting, and I don't think most people know it. So the former president of Ecuador, Rafael Correa, he originally granted Assange asylum and was in office for the first 5 years of Assange's asylum. He said he hadn't heard any reports of Assange acting the way that Moreno accused him of acting. And he has also separately called Moreno a liar. So I think there's a lot of reason to take everything that Moreno said about Assange with a huge grain of salt. In fact, most of it's probably false. So as a side note too, Assange was being spied on 24 hours per day. There was a security group called, I think it's UC Global. They're a Spanish company. They were hired by Ecuador to provide security services at the embassy, and they were illegally spying on Julian Assange and all of his visitors, to the extent that they had security cameras. They lied to Julian and to his visitors, telling them that the security cameras were there just to monitor what happened, and that they would not record audio. All of the cameras were recording audio. All people who visited Assange had their phones confiscated by UC Global, and the phones were hacked into. They were disassembled. The SIM cards were pulled out. All of the data was presumably stolen, and we don't know which intelligence agency, but we know that all of this was done at the behest of a U.S.-based intelligence agency, probably the CIA, but it might have been the FBI or the NSA. So Assange didn't have a moment in his life where he wasn't being monitored while he was at the Ecuadorian embassy. In fact, they were so adamant about recording every single word that he uttered that they even bugged the woman's bathroom, which previously Assange knew that was the one place that they hadn't bugged. So if he had to have confidential discussions with his lawyers, he would ask them to meet to come into the woman's bathroom with him. So UC Global put bugs in the bathroom as well. So like horrible, like USSR, East Berlin type, like authoritarian bullshit, which, first of all, obviously that's horrible, but at the same time too, all this stuff that they're accusing him of, if they're not actually showing you footage of it, that means it didn't happen. Because like the skateboarding thing, they've shown footage of that, and there's nothing wrong with it. He just looks a little derpy and silly, but they're trying to paint this picture of him as being this immature narcissist. And so this picture of him, in shorts, trying to skateboard inside and failing, if you just see that for a second at the same time that he's being smeared, it lends itself to this caricature they're trying to paint of him. Mm-hmm. And all this other stuff that they've accused him of doing in the embassy, given how much they were spying on him just 24/7, recording all this audio and all of his movements with video. If they're not showing you video, if they had video, they would show you to further to intensify the character assassination. The fact that they don't have video for any of that, I think, kind of speaks for itself. So anyway, Assange was granted asylum originally by Rafael Correa in 2012. Correa was a progressive leader who famously challenged U.S. hegemony, most notably by refusing to renew the U.S. military's Manta Air Base, which had huge strategic importance for the U.S. The U.S. had been leasing the space at Manta Air Base for about 10 years, and Correa refused to renew the lease. And when people objected to that, he said, look, if the U.S. military wants to have a base on Ecuadorian soil, that's okay, as long as they're okay with Ecuador having a base in Miami. Which the U.S. was like, that's absurd. Like, what is this guy even talking about? But so Rafael Correa is pretty fucking cool, and he admired Assange's work and sympathized with his situation. So he granted asylum. He was generally pretty supportive of Assange. He did temporarily cut off Assange's internet access during the 2016 election. So he wasn't like a fanboy for Assange when he thought Assange was acting inappropriately by influencing the U.S. election, which I don't think that was inappropriate, but Correa felt that way, so he cut off his internet. But other than that, he was generally pretty supportive of Assange. But everything changed when Correa was succeeded by Lenin Moreno in 2017. Moreno had been Correa's vice president, I think, for the second two terms that Correa was in office, something like that. So Correa actually campaigned for Moreno, and everyone expected Moreno to basically rule the same way as Correa and to continue the progressive policies that Correa had been implementing during his 3 terms. After Moreno won the election, though, he did a 180-degree change, criticizing the progressive policies of Correa and advocating for a neoliberal Ecuadorian future with greater cooperation with the U.S. He began reestablishing Ecuador's deference to U.S. authority, taking Ecuador out of the Union of South American Nations and generally cozying up to the Trump administration. He also pushed for legislation to make it illegal for Correa to ever run for president again, and for legislation to allow for the dismissal of any government officials deemed too close to Correa. Since then, Correa has openly called Moreno the greatest traitor in Ecuadorian history. So this is the backdrop leading up to Assange's asylum being ended. Sorry for how long that rant was. Any thoughts about this first point?
Not too much. But that shows you how influential the United States is. I mean, like when you think about like the lead up to Moreno getting elected, I can say with almost positive, like 100% positive that they kind of took Correa as a lost cause. So they cozied up to the corruptible one, who was Moreno, his vice president, got him elected, and then were able to enact whatever their interests were, and by they I mean the United States. So yeah, I think without reading it or without it being too much on here, the United States was heavily involved in this election.
I absolutely agree. I haven't seen anyone say that explicitly anywhere, but I'm sure that they had backdoor conversations with Moreno and said, hey, if you do a 180-degree and throw Correa under the bus and start letting us basically do whatever we want in Ecuador again, we'll give you money, we'll give you influence. Like, I don't know what the bribe was, but they must have done something.
Yeah, and you'll see that increasing. I think increasingly, since I don't want to get too far off here, but like increasingly, you'll see that instead of just taking out Correa, which would have been the obvious choice in like the 60s, I think they're becoming more akin to like just finding the corruptible person that they can put into power next, and then jumping on that opportunity as soon as possible. So like you can see in 2012, this happened with Correa. I think he granted asylum.
This was 2017, actually.
No, I'm going back to when Assange was granted
Oh, yeah. Okay. Okay.
asylum.
Yeah.
Back in 2012, and they bided their time for 4 years or 5 years. 2017 was when
It was.
Correa was out of
Yeah.
office. Moreno exceeded him. So basically, I think in those 4 years, the United States was really working on corrupting Moreno, making sure that he was able to um, do the things they wanted him to do once he was elected.
Yeah, I agree. It's
So,
like a soft coup.
very solid. Yeah, yeah. So,
It's a gentle
and
coup.
yeah.
I'm gonna
Uh,
coup you right to sleep.
and and I mean,
Sorry.
I'm sure in some instances they'll still revert to killing, like they did with
No, they
some.
don't do that anymore. People just die of natural causes or
Yeah, they're
commit
much
suicide.
much more subtle about it, or they'll take this approach, which is basically just finding the corruptible person and
Hmm.
getting them into office, and that's I mean that from a strategic standpoint, that's a better strategy, but.
I think that's it's not exactly the same, but it's sort of similar to what they did in Bolivia as well. So yeah, so bottom line, the U.S. got a guy in office that they knew would do their bidding, and he wanted to be cozy with the Trump administration, and he knew that that was one of the, per Jeff Sessions, per Mike Pompeo, that was one of the publicly stated highest priorities of the Trump administration was to have Assange extradited to the U.S. so that he could be tried for espionage or hacking or whatever they decided to charge him for. So the second point is within just a few months of Ecuador ending Assange's asylum, coincidentally, Ecuador got $10.2 billion worth of loans from the IMF and the World Bank, 4.2 billion from the IMF and 6 billion from the World Bank. The U.S. is hugely influential in both of those banks, owning large shares of the IMF, and I know they own a large amount of the IMF, like between 15 and 20%, I think, and I'm sure that they own a similar amount of the World Bank, and they also help with the annual funding of the IMF. So they have a lot of influence over those banks. If they told the IMF or the World Bank, hey, don't give that loan to Ecuador, then Ecuador wouldn't get the loan. So what multiple people, including Correa, have said was that the U.S. likely made approval of those funds contingent upon Assange's arrest in London. And it's interesting because I think it's easy in the U.S. because we're used to seeing government loans in the hundreds of billions and government budgets in the trillions. $10.2 billion doesn't seem relative to that, like that big of a loan. But you have to keep in perspective that uh, Ecuador has between 17 and 18 million people. So it's not even, it's less than it's about 5% the size of the US. So for a country that size, $10.2 billion is actually a fairly substantial loan. And it's a decent, what was it? Judas with the 30 pieces of silver. That's a lot of silver just for handing over one guy.
Yeah, I don't have too much to say on that, but yeah, I didn't know that there was um, money involved. I mean,
Yeah,
you should
it was
you should
within
know that there is always some sort of money involved for sure.
it was
But
within a few months of each other too.
mhm,
Like
that's a
it was
lot of yeah. I
so
was just gonna say that's a lot of money for one person.
yeah. Well, and
10,
I don't think Moreno gives a shit one way or another. So if he can get he's like $10.2 billion, and all I have to do is give you this guy that I don't give a shit about. Sure, take him.
yeah, when you think about the GDP of Ecuador too, I'm not entirely sure what it is, but that's probably quite a bit of money for them.
I was about to say, hey, I'll Google that, and then it dawned on me how strange it is that I've stopped using Google. I started using DuckDuckGo, but I don't say, oh, I'll DuckDuckGo that, or I don't even say, oh, I'll search for that. I say, let me Google that.
I can't see go with that. That makes no sense. Um, well, cool. What's this last point here?
Hang on, I was wanting to see what their GDP is. What is this in billions? Yeah, so their GDP in 2019 was only $109 billion. So, that loan in and of itself was 10% of their GDP in 2019,
Yeah.
which would be like a holy shit, yeah, our annual GDP is what, like 20 trillion or something like that? It's
A lot
around
more.
there.
A whole lot
Huh?
more than 100 billion.
Yeah, it's around. I know our national debt is like just recently eclipsed our annual GDP. So our annual GDP is somewhere around 20 trillion. So if you scale it, a $10 billion loan for Ecuador is like a $2 trillion loan for the US.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, so this last point, uh, right before the asylum was ended. Actually, I don't remember the date that this happened, but it was not that long before the asylum ended. There was a leak about Lenin Moreno, again the president of Ecuador, called the the INA papers. It was called the INA papers because they were all leaked documents and like emails and chats and stuff like that from the INA investment group. This investment group was founded by Lenin Moreno's brother, and the leaked documents showed a lot of corruption on the part of the Moreno family, connecting it to offshore accounts and money laundering. This sparked criminal investigations in Ecuador into the Moreno family and actually put Lenin Moreno at risk of being impeached. Although WikiLeaks did not claim responsibility for the leaks and it didn't originally publish them either, it did report on them via Twitter, which helped them gain more attention. So basically, Lenin Moreno, on a personal level, had an axe to grind at that point because while he was providing asylum to Julian Assange, or his government was, and he was in charge of it, uh, WikiLeaks helped publicize proof of his family's corruption that could lead to his impeachment. So at that point, not only is there a personal axe to grind, but also from his eyes, quite potentially, something essential to his own survival is uh, to take this organ to end the asylum for Julian Assange and in doing so to kneecap WikiLeaks.
Yeah. Yeah. This this kind of adds to my point on how corrupted he was. I hadn't read this yet, but yeah, this really hits home that they found the corrupted person to do the job for them. Were these INA papers post Moreno? Well, I guess they were post elected, but post after they kicked Assange out, basically.
No, this leak came before they kicked Assange out, and this is part of why it's part of why even people from the Ecuadorian government or previous members, like people who used to be under Correa, have said this is obvious. This obviously contributed to Moreno's decision because he had an axe to grind at that point because he felt like Assange was drawing attention to his dirty laundry.
Okay.
Um, this is really silly and shallow, but like, just maybe this is a case of, you know, knowing what I know about him, it's biasing what I see. But doesn't he look like he would be like a slimy, corrupt douchebag?
Yeah, yeah, kind of got that look, you know.
Yeah. He has that look like, hey, I want to sell out the people of my country to Wall Street interest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so interesting. It reaches to Ecuador and everywhere, really.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
But yeah,
I
so
think that pretty much wraps it up.
yeah,
Um,
it's so funny when you see all that evidence in front of you. It's like, oh, right, that's why the asylum ended. But none of that was covered by the mainstream media. Instead, all you heard about was skateboarding and rudeness and cat poop.
yeah, and uh, yeah, I'm very intrigued at this point tomorrow. Um, how that'll turn out. I assume that he's going to be back in the United States I'm assuming that's kind of the verdict.
Not back in the United States, but yeah.
Well, they'll then be able to try him in the United States if they extradite
Yeah,
him.
yeah. You said he'll be back in the United States. He's an
Oh,
Australian citizen, actually,
yeah.
originally.
They'll be able to try him under United States law.
Yeah, what will probably happen is they're going to side with the U.S. They're going to uphold the extradition, but then Assange's lawyers are probably going to try to appeal it. The appeals will probably drag out the process for a few months. The UK courts are almost certainly going to strike down the appeals because that's what they did in the past when he tried to appeal extradition requests from Sweden. So I think ultimately he's going to end up in the U.S. and he's going to be tried for in kangaroo court for these bogus charges.
Yeah. Well, Julian, we're all rooting for you.
Absolutely.
Um,
My heart goes out to him.
yeah, because we need more people like you.
If I could afford to, I'd quit my job and go protest outside the court.
I can't afford that. But
Yeah.
the most we can do is make a video. But
if some rich, lonely old woman wants to bankroll me in exchange for cuddles, I mean, email us in search of true north at gmail.com.
And you know, we'll continue the podcast too, but then we'll also protest.
All right, man. This was awesome.
Cool. Signing off.
All right. Fuck. How do I do this? How do I stop recording? Stop recording.